A year later, in 1808, Edward's wife died, leaving him with 11 children to look after. Although Edward lived at Godmersham in Kent and only visited his house at Chawton, it must have been of great comfort to him to have his mother and 2 sisters close by when he and the children were in residence at Chawton. Jane's letters show great concern for Edward's children, and she and Cassandra did all they could to ease their pain at the loss of their mother. Therefore, when Jane moved to Chawton on the 7th of July 1809, she would have felt a great sense of purpose in her role as aunt to the children. Also, she had the advantage of brother James and family at Steventon, only a few miles away. If, as we suspect, the early effects of Addison's disease were already established, this calm, safe and secure atmosphere would have been perfect for the resumption of Jane's literary work. Jane was involved in the domestic running of the household, particularly in the absence of Cassandra. This probably explains her attention to household details in her novels. In one of her letters, she says,
I am very grand indeed. I had the dignity of dropping out to my mother's laudanum last night. I carry about the keys of the wine closet, and twice since I began this letter have had orders to give in the kitchen.
Looking after Mrs. Austen must have been quite a task, as we know she was quite a character. She loved the garden, and must have been pleased with Chawton as there were improvements to be made. She is also thought to have been most concerned with her health, though some of her illnesses may well have been imagined, as she lived to a very good age of 88. When Jane was very ill with Addison's disease, she would put 3 chairs together to lie on rather than use the sofa, as her mother may have wished to lie down on the sofa when she came in from the garden. This would have been a very busy sitting room, with many visitors calling. Jane wrote at this little mahogany table, stopping her work when visitors called or when domestic duties interrupted her. In one of her letters she says,
Composition seems to me impossible, with a head full of joints of mutton and doses of rhubarb.
She also comments about visitors when she's had a good period of work on persuasion.
We've been very little plagued with visitors this last week, but I am in terror for today, a fine, bright Sunday.
Looking at this room now, and considering the nature of the interruption she would have experienced, maybe the scene in Pride and Prejudice, where Mr. Darcy is being constantly interrupted by Miss Bingley while he is trying to write, expresses some of Jane's own frustrations of needing to break off from her writing to enter into polite conversation.
Mr. Darcy was writing, and Miss Bingley, seated near him, was watching the progress of his letter and repeatedly calling off his attention by messages to his sister. Elizabeth took up some needlework and was sufficiently amused in attending to what passed between Darcy and his companion. The perpetual commendations of the lady, either on his handwriting, or on the evenness of his lines, or on the length of his letter, with the perfect unconcern with which her praises were received, formed a curious dialogue, and were exactly in unison with her opinion of each. How delighted Miss Darcy will be to receive such a letter. He made no answer. You write uncommonly fast. You are mistaken. I write rather slowly.
It is interesting that the first work which Jane resumes is Sense and Sensibility, possibly because out of the 3 manuscripts available to her, it was the only one not to have disappointed her. Northanger Abbey would have cost £10 to buy back, and Pride and Prejudice had been rejected, although the manuscript was never read. Jane must have been delighted when T. Egerton of London published Sense and Sensibility in 1811. After the £10 fiasco of Northanger Abbey, the £150 she received seemed prodigious recompense. Both Jane and the publisher must have been cautious, as it was published anonymously. The calming influence of Chawton worked its magic. This, combined with the boost of a novel published, and the remuneration of £150 gave Jane Austen the confidence she needed, and Pride and Prejudice was completed and published in 1813. The rest, as they say, is history. We've now considered Jane's three main places of residence: Steventon, Bath and Chawton. Before we continue with the remainder of Jane's life at Chawton, perhaps this is a good time to consider the places that she visited from all of her three homes and how she recalled them in minute detail in her novels. One of the places that instantly comes to mind is Lyme Regis. Jane visited Lyme in 1804 while she was living in Bath, and it must have made a lasting impression. It is in Persuasion that Jane writes so evocatively about this particular visit.
They were come too late in the year for any amusement or variety which Lyme as a public place might offer. The rooms were shut up, the lodgers almost all gone, scarcely any family but of the residents left. And as there's nothing to admire in the buildings themselves, the remarkable situation of the town, the principal street almost hurrying into the water, the walk to the Cobb skirting around the pleasant little bay, which in the season is animated with bathing machines and company, the Cobb itself, its old wonders and new improvements, with the very beautiful line of old cliffs stretching out to the east of the town, are what a stranger's eye will seek. And a very strange stranger it must be who does not see the charms in the immediate environs of Lyme to make him wish to know it better. The scenes in its neighbourhood, Charmouth, with its high grounds and extensive sweeps of country, and still more its sweet retired bay, backed by dark cliffs, where fragments of low rock among the sands make it the happiest spot for watching the flow of tide, for sitting in unwearied contemplation. The party from Uppercross, passing down by the now deserted and melancholy-looking rooms, and still descending, soon found themselves on the seashore, and lingering only as all must linger and gaze on a first return to the sea who ever deserved to look on it at all, proceeded towards the Cobb, equally their object in itself and on Captain Wentworth's account, for in a small house near the foot of an old pier of unknown date were the Harvilles settled. Captain Wentworth turned in to call on his friend, the others walked on, and he was to join them on the Cobb.
Jane loved the sea and is looking back fondly on her visit when she's writing this. Persuasion has a beautiful, autumnal quality to it, and is the novel with the most descriptive passages about the English countryside. The Cobb is actually an ancient jetty that Louisa Musgrove falls from, causing a nearly fatal accident. Perhaps Jane's fondness for the sea has something to do with a mysterious romance. We know Jane was attractive, even though we have only Cassandra's sketch of her, and as a drawing, it is perhaps not a great success. However, the eyes are very striking, and this description from James Austen Leigh confirms that Jane's eyes were very beautiful. Her figure was rather tall and slender, her step light and firm, and her whole appearance expressive of health and animation. In complexion, she was a clear brunette with a rich colour. She had full, round cheeks, with mouth and nose small and well-formed, bright hazel eyes, and brown hair forming natural curls close to her face. Cassandra was the only other person to have Jane's confidence about this alleged romance, but as we know, she destroyed letters of an intimate nature, and as this account from James Austen Leigh shows, she only gave this information long after Jane's death. There is one passage of romance in her history with which I am imperfectly acquainted, and which I am unable to assign name or date or place, though I have it on sufficient authority. Many years after her death, some circumstances induced Sister Cassandra to break through her habitual reticence and to speak of it. She said that while they were staying at some seaside place, they became acquainted with a gentleman whose charm of person, mind and manners was such that Cassandra thought him worthy to possess and likely to win her sister's love. When they parted, he expressed his intention of soon seeing them again, and Cassandra felt no doubt as to his motives. But they never again met. Within a short time, they heard of his sudden death. There's been much speculation about who this gentleman was, and in her book Dear Jane, Constance Pilgrim explores the possibility that it may have been John Wordsworth, the brother of the poet William. Did Jane exchange the name of Wordsworth for Wentworth in Persuasion? We know Jane liked to play with names and places. For example, Charles Bingley of Netherfield in Pride and Prejudice must have been based on friend of the family Charles Lloyd of Bingley Hall. The dates are certainly feasible, as Jane was in Lyme in 1804, and John, a sea captain, died when his ship, the Earl of Abergavenny, sank in 1805 off Portland Bill. We've always thought that Jane's interest in matters naval was due to her brothers Charles and Francis. Miss Pilgrim goes as far as to suggest that Jane had met John Wordsworth before this time, but that, as they say, is another story. It was on another visit, this time to Manydown Park near Steventon, while she was living in Bath, that she received a proposal of marriage from Harris Bigwither, a brother of close female friends of hers. He proposed in the evening, and Jane accepted him. But by the morning she had changed her mind. He was eminently suitable, if 6 years her junior. Perhaps Jane Austen had listened to the advice from her own pen which Jane Bennet gives to her younger sister Elizabeth in Pride and Prejudice.
Oh, Lizzie, do anything rather than marry without affection. Are you quite sure that you feel what you ought to do?
Jane Austen undoubtedly shared Jane Bennet's point of view. It was unusual in such a time when making an advantageous marriage was so important. For a lady of Jane Austen's class to be so set on marrying for love or not at all was rather brave. In this respect, she was well ahead of her time. Another place which Jane frequently visited was Edward's estate at Godmersham in Kent. In this quotation from one of Jane's letters, we can tell just how comfortable and relaxed she felt when she was there.
I have no occasion to think of the price of bread and meat where I am now. Let me shake off vulgar cares and conform to the happy indifference of East Kent wealth.
Emma was based around London. It is suspected that Highbury was based upon Leatherhead.
Highbury, the large and populous village almost amounting to a town to which Hartfield, in spite of its separate lawn and shrubberies and name, did really belong, afforded her no equals.
Highbury is only 16 miles from London, and the influence of the rural community by the metropolis is something we suspect Jane Austen disapproved of.
Emma's very good opinion of Frank Churchill was a little shaken the following day by hearing that he had gone off to London merely to have his hair cut.
Another place Jane no doubt visited was Great Bookham in Surrey. This was typical of the visit she made, as the vicar was her mother's cousin. Jane's circle of acquaintances tended to be limited to relations and friends of the family. Even when she had the success of Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice behind her, she was little known outside her family. But by the time Emma was written, Jane's work was known to have been admired by the Prince Regent, who was said to have had a copy of her novels in all of his houses. Whether he read them or not is a matter for conjecture, but Jane dedicated Emma to him.